Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency. In this video, we're continuing a series on regional cross-model overviews, giving you information on local change trends under both conventional warming and tipping point scenarios. I brought out this cross-model approach for the first time in our Lifeboats video. There are a lot of interesting places that didn't make the extremely high bar to be counted as a lifeboat. We've covered the Southwest, the Pacific Northwest, and the Midwest now, where we do find the first of those lifeboat regions. I didn't make a call for a lifeboat in the Southeast, but there are a couple of areas I'm going to be pointing out in this video for their excellent stability. There is excellent stability to be found in the Southeast. If you're interested in that, or in Appalachia as a special region of focus, I'm going to direct you to the video I also released today. Search for Resilience in the Time of Storms on my channel if you're interested in Appalachia-focused information. Now, it may not surprise you that, along with some strongholds in the Southeast, there's also parts of the region where resilience building will be a serious challenge. It's not like we got to run away screaming or anything crazy like that. In the Southwest, I'm a bit more dramatic about the risk profile because if you don't have water, you've got a real problem. The Southeast, we are looking at heat increases, but water is life. And across the vast majority of the region, you've got that hope. We'll get into some details on that, on where we do expect to see drought trend emerge in the Southeast. Let's get on the same page for just a minute before we get rolling. We are not where we expected to be on climate. If you don't follow climate news, you might not know for the last 2 years, we've been rolling over 1.5C, the threshold where we were supposed to try and limit warming if we wanted to avoid really crazy impacts. I get a lot of my global climate numbers from the Copernicus Institute. They're the official climate operation of the EU. They do a nice monthly update. And I do have to show you some bad news that January of 2025 came in really hot. January came in at 1.75C. So this video, we're looking at projections for 2C. We came in at 1.6C as a year's average for 2024. 2025, not off to a great start. So I don't know, folks. Most governments and organizations, they used to peg 2C above pre-industrial baseline to about 2050. It certainly does not seem to me like we are on that timeline anymore. Though there is some positivity that we're not shooting directly into the sun because we are now declared to be in La Nina. That often cools off global temperatures, and let's hope that holds true now. There are some positive signs coming in on that front through February. We had a brief heat spike last winter, in winter of 24, similar to the January of 2025 spike. Let me show you. So this is an old visual from the Copernicus Institute showing February of 24 information, where you can see we had a couple of days over 2C in February of 24. This is sort of what the daily breakdown peak looks like for January. And after this dizzying peak in February of 24, it did come down and was fairly stable at 1.5 over the summer. So I think there is very legitimate reason to be concerned by what we're seeing coming in from Earth systems. I'm looking for the February numbers to come in before I make a judgment call, because it's possible that what we're seeing in 24 and 25 is the emergence of a new pattern. It's too soon to tell. All right, though, it's time. It's time to focus in on the Southeast. And we've got an important pair of figures from the NCA5. That's the 5th National Climate Assessment. And if you haven't heard of that, you did pay for it. It was taxpayer funded. So let's make sure you get some use out of it and look at the water projections for the Southeast. So in figure 210, we can see changes in precipitation expressed as a percentage. And you can see in this figure that at 2C, most of the Southeast is projected to get a little bit more rain, with exceptions showing up in Florida. And let's look at another model. This is figure 4.3, where we see change in precipitation projected as inches. So we can see here another model showing a clear drought trend in southern Florida. We are also seeing here a patchy drought trend emerging over Louisiana and kind of running along the Gulf there. Let me pull up a side-by-side. I think it's important to see them together, and the thing to watch is drought. The thing to watch is where we see overlapping trends around potential for increasing aridity. And as we see, most of the Southeast looks okay on this figure in terms of overall precipitation change. We are expecting heat increases, and we'll get more into that in a minute, but anyone who cares about growing things knows if there's more heat coming, you need more water to balance that out. With the exceptions of parts of Louisiana and Florida, we do see the potential for more water to come in these projections. Parts of those potentially drought impacted states, they're culturally linked to the Caribbean in pretty profound ways. I always thought there was a fair amount of truth in considering New Orleans as the northernmost city of the Caribbean. And this drought trend we're seeing here, it's worth noting it is also emerging across the Caribbean in a very serious way. So that's our first big picture info for the Southeast. And I want to pull up some info on those heat increases I mentioned, but the angle I'm going to take might surprise you. Because I think that when we talk about climate, many people in the Southeast are unimpressed by the remarkable fact that summers can be uncomfortably hot in the Southeast. So in the Southeast, if we're trying to communicate, I don't think the factor to watch is daytime heat. I think it's nighttime heat. That's where we actually see more significant change that's going to impact growing patterns in the Southeast. Let's pull up the projected increase in nights over 70. So I want to show off this new viewer made by AR volunteer Jackie Pie. I wanted to share it with the community because we have this resource now. It's on the resource page, and you can see the URL at the top of the page there. It's in a more accessible color scale. It's a very fluid visualization, and it's powered by NCI 5 data. Jackie Pie made this before any of the NOAA databases were potentially compromised. And I just want to say that Jackie Pie is very cool and that the Climate Atlas is not the only amazing thing that she has made in her free time, because she's not just regular cool, she's like Mars rovers cool. For folks who are interested in work on the ground, Jackie Pie has volunteered to be our Los Angeles ground leader. Let's focus back on the Southeast, though, where we do have current ground leaders ready to rumble in Arkansas and Florida. So let's take a look at warm nights at 1.5 C. So this is the change we felt last summer. Last summer was about 1.5 C, and many people reported that they were feeling that it just wasn't cooling down at night, that there were 2-3 weeks where it just didn't cool down at night more than there used to be, more than there used to be back in, say, 2000. And if we look ahead, if we look towards a 2C summer, look at that change. Look at how those warm nights spread. There's really notable difference, particularly in North Carolina there and in the western part of Kentucky. But we do see pretty good cool night preservation all along the spine of Appalachia, and I was surprised how good it looks in eastern Kentucky, actually. I want us to look at the numbers on that change, and that we can see throughout the Southeast, we're talking about more than a month. We're talking about 4, even 5 weeks of additional warm nights. And here's why I'm concerned about those warm night increases, which they're long increases. Many of our current staple crops, they grow at night, especially in the Southeast. They set and fill grainer pods at night when it's cooler, not during the hot days of the region. So when we see these nighttime temps increasing, we're talking about potentially quite serious and direct impacts to agriculture. Of course, there are some crops that tolerate warm nights fairly well. Otherwise, what would people eat in current tropical parts of the world, right? There are parts of the Southeast that grow a good amount of rice, say. The overall projected increases in temperature in the rice-growing regions of the Southeast, we're looking at a milder change outlook than rice-growing regions in other parts of the world. Doing what we can to keep up domestic rice production is important. There's some controversy about how rice is going to do. There's some evidence that rice will do okay in these American projected warm night conditions if humidity stays high. Continuing high humidity is a factor where I do think we can count on your region by and large. There are also many vegetables, commercially important vegetables, that thrive in warm night conditions and would tolerate the projected daytime highs in your region. For people who grow across the Southeast, I think it's very important to look at these projections and think about how they could impact your local farmers and food systems. Because in some places, there's going to be a need to make big changes to keep production up. Experimenting more with hot weather crops like cassava, sorghum, and millet might be of interest and of use to you in your region. And I'd like to make a note one more time about that stability all along Appalachia. And let's go back to the figure here and look along Appalachia again, because this figure is a great shorthand for where you've got decent hot season stability, day and night. You'll see that North Georgia, looking all right. Eastern Kentucky, surprisingly strong preservation. Kentucky, I know I brought you up a couple of times, but you really jumped out and surprised me when I did your detailed state level outlook. You are looking stronger in the NCA 5 than you did in the NCA 4. Kentucky has got serious potential. There are also parts of Virginia that look just wonderful, and across West Virginia, there's incredible promise across models and factors. And speaking of Appalachia, that other video I released today focuses on Western North Carolina, which Asheville is in the cultural spotlight as the most visible epicenter of the disasters of Hurricanes Helene and Milton that struck the Southeast last year. And I feel remiss if I don't note the potential in the Southeast. You see that when we look at the water outlook. You see that when we look at places with good nighttime low stability. There are a lot of parts of this region with good potential, even if that potential includes getting on the ball and changing up what we grow. But alongside that potential, we need to talk about your heightened risk of disaster in these conventional warming models. And we're seeing that heightened risk of disaster emerge. There's a couple of figures I want to show you about that. Let's talk about deluge type rain first, not from hurricanes, just regular rainstorms, and then we're going to talk about hurricanes. I mentioned Asheville. Asheville kind of stands out in the national imagination because many people thought of it as a climate destination. And I have noted in my previous analysis of North Carolina that the Asheville region looks good in the models on many factors, but not on this one. This is figure 2.12 from the NCA5 showing extreme precipitation trends, and you can see it stands out very clear across all three subfigures. Bam, bam, bam. A pattern of deluge-like rain that impacts southern end of North Carolina's mountains. It falls over Asheville, it extends well into Tennessee. And this is obviously a complex figure, right? If you look for repeating patterns across the subfigures, that'll help you highlight the danger spots. That nasty fuzz stands out as one of the most dangerous deluge type patterns in the nation. It extends from southwest North Carolina down into Mississippi through Alabama. So where you see that darkness lying over the southeast, you're looking at increased chances of very extreme rain, deluge type rain, that could cause riverine flooding, that could be harmful to crops in the fields at many sensitive times in their growth cycle. Other than this little additional hotspot right here, which is repeating on the border between North Carolina and Virginia, the Southeast is otherwise about in line with the national average. We do expect more extreme rain just about everywhere, and designing our infrastructure in line with that expectation is going to be important if we want the roads to hold up. It's also worth noting there are natural ways we can respond to this threat of deluge, ways that can help. I don't know if anyone else out there also enjoys reading old literature from the South. You frequently read in old stories that someone or something gets stuck in a canebrake. So let's look at that. Let's look at an old photo of canebrake, which used to be a dominant landscape feature in the Southeast. You can see this is a guy on a horse. This is how big these canebrakes were. We're talking about 25 feet high. Each of the canes is several inches thick. So this is a Southern heritage ecosystem that's an intensely bioactive wetland, very active, very productive, biologically friendly ecosystem. That, according to most contemporary records, was also a huge pain in the butt in regards to human activity, which is why people spent a lot of energy ripping it out. But now we look at things and it seems like maybe the river cane was supposed to be there. So these deluge type rains, especially in Alabama, they're going to fall. They're projected to fall just about exactly where major canebrakes used to be. So we maybe should take the hint and work to get them back in. Canebrakes would help give the water places to be and get it back into the water table, get it back into the groundwater, helping guide that natural positive movement of water that would likely help reduce the threat of stacked disasters. Like with Hurricane Helene, with the damage we saw from Hurricane Helene, part of what made things so bad is that the areas that got hit were already drenched. The soil was already saturated by intense rain. I got to show you the hurricane outlook now. Now, this is an old figure. This is from the NCA4, but I haven't seen an update, and this figure has proven prescient when we look at how hurricanes are coming in the last 2 years. Check it out. We're seeing hurricane tracks reduce in frequency. Let's look at the good news first. See, they used to come in here around Biloxi. Look, they're darting away. We're seeing reduced hurricane activity projected around Biloxi. With the sea level rise stuff, I don't know that Biloxi is a great place for a generational future, but if you're an older person, you got older people in your family there, I would let them be. There's a pretty nice near-term coastal outlook there, and same thing for Myrtle Beach. Surprisingly good near-term outlook there on many factors. I think there's no reason to ditch out on all the places that we love too early. While there are some beaches that look very vulnerable to even a foot of sea level rise, most notably in New Jersey, there are also beaches where we've got some time left, and that's particularly true in the Southeast. Everyone who loves the beach knows the beach isn't exactly a risk-free environment, but I know some people out there listening, they just want 10 good years on the water, and I think these projections do show that you've got some hope of getting those 10 good years on the water. Looking more deeply at this hurricane outlook, of those fairly resilient beaches I mentioned, the hurricane outlook is more intense for Myrtle Beach than for Biloxi. Let's look at those danger points. The big danger points that we see emerging in these lower two figures are in Florida. Check out this change in tracks. One of them is shooting over Big Bend, cross model shooting up over Big Bend with inland hurricanes projected to cross Georgia and the Carolinas in both models. We also see a projected track for very strong hurricanes crossing over in both models, I'm sad to say, right around Sanibel Island, which has taken some sad hits these last couple of years. And being a full strength hurricane, being a Cat 3 hurricane all the way across the Florida Peninsula, we see in these projections. Those Big Bend hurricanes in particular, they're terrible. They've been terrible for folks on the Gulf, and they're terrible for their inland impacts. No one wants to see another Helene type event, bringing flooding rain and terrible winds well inland, hurting communities in Georgia and the Carolinas. But the tragic truth of it is, it does look like we're likely to see more of these inland hurricanes if these projections continue to play out the way they have been. And these extreme weather events, both deluge type rain and inland hurricanes, and the awful way they can stack on each other, they're a major emerging threat to the Southeast. They're going to make things more difficult in Georgia, but I just want to say out loud, I am not counting Atlanta out. A lot of work is being done to get ready in Atlanta. I think Atlanta has tremendous potential and will remain an absolute powerhouse of a city. Where we saw a lot of strength in our first figures, in Kentucky, in West Virginia, in parts of Virginia, we don't see so much risk of these disasters emerging. Not as much risk of deluge type rain, not as much risk of inland hurricane tracks. So very high potential there. And that region that I mentioned, I'm going to say it again, Kentucky, West Virginia, parts of Virginia, also stands out cross models. So if you nerd out on climate like me, you may know that we are seeing signs from Earth systems right now that we may have hit a tipping point, that we're observing strange changes in the ocean. You may have seen news articles talking about possible AMOC collapse, and that would lead to big changes in heat circulation in the oceans. AMOC collapse is the scientific name for our best understood emergency off switch for Earth's climate. We have paleoclimate evidence that this Earth system has collapsed before, gone into on-off states. There are signs that we can see that Mother Earth has hit that metaphorical red button. And if we have hit that tipping point, the size of the changes facing the world are going to whack the heck out of us as a global civilization. I'm a bright side type thinker, and I don't see how global civilization or global food systems could make it through the projected changes of AMOC collapse, which would bring about a time of great storms. We're going to need local food systems, local lifeways. Looking at some modeling of that potential tipping point in the southeast, that high potential region in a conventional warming scenario also stands out. You can see this blue dot kind of centered over West Virginia, where we're expecting not to see the drought trend that's likely to impact much of the rest of North America in the event of AMOC collapse. We see also for the region a mild cooling trend, a trend that'll push against the warming trend, but not an alarming cooling trend like we see in Northern Europe. And down towards the Gulf, we see in this map about changes to the winds, a scale with velocity potential, where we expect the potential velocity of winds to increase in the event of AMOC shutdown, particularly strong as we're in close to the Gulf. I'm concerned about that potential for wind velocity increases, particularly as you are closer to the Gulf in the southeast in the event of AMOC collapse. AMOC collapse is projected to cause serious storms in many places. That's what the science says, and there are indigenous traditions, including from the southeast, that talk about the change time coming with great winds like we haven't experienced in long spans of generations that would come in the time of storms. So, folks, We got good news and we got bad news in this outlook. Good parts, places that look strong across all kinds of scenarios and factors. And also, we're looking at scary, gigantic disasters. When I see that drought trend heading towards Louisiana, it hurts my heart. The lifeways, the cultures, and people that will be impacted by that, they are some I so sincerely admire. I was so kindly treated in the time that I lived in Louisiana, and that is a place where the land and the water are so giving. Many people have maintained traditional lifeways down there, just as some of us do in the giving lands that I so love in my home region. Because of that, because of that level of change they're facing, because of the challenges Louisiana is already facing, I do want to take a minute to make an unusual plug. If you're a person who eats shellfish, which I don't, but if you do, many people really like it, you should care about the fisheries in Louisiana. Last year, crawfish farmers expected the worst season ever, and unfortunately, they got it. A lot of bad factors came together, including drought, including storms, including extreme heat, and it was very bad for the crawfish harvest. The farmers and communities who harvest crawfish need support, and for those who prefer the crawfish of the sea, for people who eat shrimp, I just want to take a minute to say that Gulf shrimp is probably the most ethical shrimp you can buy. A lot of shrimp that's imported from overseas. There's a lot of slavery in that supply chain. People like you and me trapped on boats, often under false pretenses, their papers taken away, forced to endlessly shell shrimp. Think about what that would do to your hands 18 hours a day shelling shrimp. Gulf Shrimp from America, you're mostly supporting families. American families who have a sincere generational commitment to sustainable fisheries. Supporting the agricultural transition, supporting farmers and other people who put food into our national supply chain, that's particularly important across the Southeast. The Southeast has potential, but their food system has a big change lift in store, according to these projections. We might all need to try new foods, be willing to engage with a changing national food landscape to help us get to the best future we can build together. Thanks for spending some time learning with me, folks. If you're in the Southeast, I've got local resilience building tips for you, as well as details across factors in your state level outlook video. I'm wishing you all the best. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks for spending some time learning with me, and I want to thank you all quite sincerely. You know, AR is where it is because of the AR community. The donors, the volunteers, people spreading the word online, and most importantly, all of us doing the work on the ground to grow and strengthen habitats, food systems, and communities. We're getting ready for our volunteer ground launch, and the response has been amazing. I look forward to bringing you stories from dozens of volunteer leaders throughout 2025. If you'd like to make a donation, you will be supporting change in communities on the ground across America through 2025. You can donate at www.americanresiliency.org. Thank you for getting ready with me, and talk with you again soon.